Hello, everyone. My name is Stanley St. Rose, and today we're going to be talking about the novel Rebecca, written by Daphne Du Maurier. Now, before I go into the summary and analysis of this work, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and/or comment so that the channel can continue to grow. In this novel, we meet a narrator. She is the individual that we follow throughout the novel, and at the beginning of the novel, she's working for this rich American woman by the name of Miss Van Hopper. Miss Van Hopper is just basically hires the narrator to do basic tasks for her. She's pretty much the narrator is pretty much Mrs. Van Hopper's assistant. And Mrs. Van Hopper doesn't really stay in the novel for that long. She basically introduces herself to a character by the name of Maxim, and after she introduces herself, she pretty much disappears, and the narrator and Maxim pretty much fall in love. And the narrator quits her job with Mrs. Van Hopper and just run off with Maxim to get married. They get married and they go to live in Maxim's wonderful castle-like mansion by the name of Manderley. Manderley is a really wonderful place. It has different wings to it, has different sides, it has a lot of different furniture. It's a wonderful place to be, a wonderful place to look at. And we kind of get some history of Manderley. It's a place where Maxim De Winter, his family, the De Winter family, they've lived there for centuries upon centuries, generations upon generations, and they're known by their community to throw these wonderful balls, these wonderful parties that everybody loved to go to and everybody loved to just join in. So the narrator goes to live there, and at first, she just doesn't feel comfortable because she learns about Maxim's previous wife by the name of Rebecca De Winter. And Rebecca De Winter was just this woman that she knew what to do. She knew how to run a household. She knew how to throw a party. She knew how to dress. She was beautiful. On the outside, everybody saw Rebecca as just this perfect wife. She did everything perfectly. She was graceful in every eye in the room was always on her. So the narrator, who's this woman that was not born to be a wealthy woman, Rebecca was born to be wealthy. Was Rebecca was her parents raised her, family raised her to be a woman of power, a woman of wealth, a woman of status. The narrator just feels out of place because she wasn't raised like Rebecca, and she just doesn't know how to run a household. She doesn't know how to throw a fancy ball or fancy function. So whenever she's like compared to Rebecca, she always loses. So she's always like living in Rebecca's shadow within the novel. So when she arrives, when she's living in the mansion and she's there, she gets introduced to this army of servants and housekeepers, and she really doesn't know how to work them or to make them do their jobs. She has to choose the food selection for the day for the house. She has to choose the way that the furniture is moved around or cleaned or dusted. So as the wife of Maxim, the narrator has a lot of work to do. It's not just sitting around the house, but at the same time, she just feels out of place. She gets introduced to a woman by the name of Mrs. Danvers, and she tries to trust Mrs. Danvers or try to work with Mrs. Danvers, and it was a mistake because Mrs. Danvers hates the narrator. She feels like the narrator is a disgrace to Rebecca because Mrs. Danvers is a character that loved Rebecca, and we later learned that I'm gonna tell you guys this now that Rebecca dies, and the Mrs. Danvers believes that Maxim had to do something with it, and he did. So Mrs. Danvers doesn't like the fact that Maxim is moving on with his life, getting married, and bringing a new woman into Rebecca's household. So Mrs. Danvers is very cold, very distant. She just doesn't like the narrator. And the same way, Maxim, although he's married to the narrator, he's very distant because he's dealing with the darkness of his past that that's always constantly in his mind, and people are always bringing up Rebecca, and he doesn't like to talk about Rebecca because Rebecca did something very evil to him. So the story goes on, and we just like watch the narrator try to figure out how to live in this, how to figure out how to live in Manderley, how to do her duties in Manderley, and from time to time she gets lost in the huge mansion, and eventually what happens after a while, after you get adjusted, and after she gets adjusted, she starts meeting Maxim's friends, and they're all out of her league because Maxim's the people that Maxim knows and hangs around with and talk to, they're people of upper class status. They're refined. They were brought up to be wealthy, to be in the upper class. And the narrator, everywhere she goes or everybody she meets, she's always, seems less. So she even asks during this one scene within the novel, there's this huge ball that is thrown, and she asks Mrs. Danvers to help her pick out what to pick or what costume to pick, and Mrs. Danvers tricks her, and this gets Maxim extremely mad, and this causes a scene and causes a small rift between Maxim and the narrator. So pretty much bad news starts to come around because, of course, Mrs. Danvers hates the narrator. We get different people coming forward from Rebecca's past. And what happens within the novel that makes everything turn around or start to get dark is that they find this boat that Rebecca died in, mysteriously died in. They found it, and Maxim is now worried because now his secret is going to be revealed. By the end of the novel, what we learn is that Maxim is the one that killed Rebecca because on the surface, Rebecca seems to be a wonderful wife, a wonderful house manager, basically. But she really wasn't. She just appeared to be that on the surface. Rebecca was actually a very manipulative woman. She was very promiscuous. She slept with a lot of men behind Maxim's back. And the night that Maxim killed her, she said that she was pretty much going to have this child that was not his child and make him raise the child because if he causes a scene or if he tries to divorce her, he was going to ruin him. And so Maxim was angry because his wife is cheating on him, sleeping with other men, and there's nothing he can do about it. And he doesn't want to lose his family house, his family wealth, and so what he does is he takes a gun and shoots his wife, and Rebecca dies, and then he covers up the murder, and he pretty much builds the story of a boating incident where Rebecca died in a boating incident. So when they find the boat, his story starts to look a little um, bad. So the story goes on, and he reveals this to the narrator, and the narrator is shocked and kind of, scared because even though that your wife was horrible, he still committed murder. So the story kind of like does this thing to get us back on Maxim's side. Basically, what they tell us or what we learn next is that since Rebecca was so manipulative, she was already dying. She had cancer, and her doctor confirms this within the novel that she had cancer. So when Maxim killed her, she was already going to die in a few months. So he didn't really kill her, or he shouldn't be blamed for killing her because she was already going to die. But still, even though that Rebecca was a horrible wife, and she was going to make him, take care of a kid that's not his, he still committed murder. And I mean, I guess that's okay, and he gets away with it then, because at the end of the novel, the Maxim is still together with the narrator. They're still happy together, and we start to get a happy ending. And then like they come back to the mansion, and they find it burning because when Mrs. Danvers find out um, that Maxim had something to do with Rebecca's death and that he's going to live in Manderley with his new wife, with the narrator, with the new Mrs. De Winter. She couldn't take it because Mrs. Danvers, she loved Rebecca. She would follow Rebecca to the ends of the earth, and so she burns the mansion to the ground, and pretty much Maxim and the narrator watch it burn down, and then the novel pretty much ends. We do get to meet different characters. We meet a character by the name of Jack within the novel that loved Rebecca, but Rebecca didn't love back, and he was trying to get cause problems. He was trying to cause problems for Maxim, but his efforts failed. So this novel was very interesting. I mean, it's somewhat of a happy ending. The narrator, she's still with Maxim, and they're together at the end of the novel, and nobody's after them anymore because after Mrs. Danvers burns down the mansion, I mean, she's pretty much gone. Jack is gone, who was an instigator of Maxim within the novel, and well, the main characters are left together for the end and just to be happy. The only thing is, I mean, Maxim loses his family mansion. Um, he loses Manderley, and all of that family history, all of the generations upon generations that lived there, and all of the family portraits, and all of the wonderful furniture and the beautiful scenery that came with Manderley, was lost to the fire because Mrs. Danvers doesn't play. In terms of analysis, this novel is pretty significant because when you look at it from the narrator's perspective, you kind of see the role that she had to play of second tier because everybody loved Rebecca. Everybody, even though that Rebecca died, they still lingered on the memory of Rebecca. And when the new narrator married Maxim and took Rebecca's place, she just didn't fit the role quite well, and it just reminded them of how great Rebecca was and how terrible the narrator is. And the narrator really feels insignificant, and her self esteem goes down a lot within the novel because she felt like she wasn't good enough for Maxim. She felt like she wasn't worthy enough for Maxim, and pretty much she existed on Maxim's will. And what I mean by that is Maxim holds the power of the purse. He has all of the money. He has the house. He has the resources. She has nothing. The only thing that she can provide to the relationship is herself. And so she tried her best to be close to Maxim. At first, she thought that Maxim didn't really love her, but he did. He just had to deal with this murder that he covered up, and that really altered his the way he behaved. Because when you're thinking about a murder you covered up, you can't really, think about marrying and loving a person completely. Um, so the mental workings of individuals within the novel is very significant because the way that people think impacts the way that they act, and because of the fact that Rebecca was so clever, she created this portrait of herself, this picture of herself depicted to her society that showed that she was this wonderful wife, this wonderful keeper of Manderley. But in the inside, she was just a horrible insect and trying to make Maxim's life a living hell. And Maxim, he loved the narrator since the day they met, and he wanted to be with her. But the thing is, like, he was thinking about the murder so much that he pretty much became distant towards the narrator, and the narrator really felt insignificant and unimportant throughout the novel because everybody hated her. The servants hated her because they love Rebecca so much, and her husband was distant from her because of the murder. So it's a very significant novel. This novel has gotten a lot of heat in the past because of the fact that it's actually very, very has a lot of parallels with Jane Eyre. And I'm not going to lie, it's true. This novel, Rebecca by Daphne Du Maurier and Jane Eyre, they're very similar. They pretty much share the same storyline where you have a rich man with a massive house and two wives, but there's a little bit difference between what happens between the two wives. But it's a lot of it's the same. It's pretty much the same story, which is very weird because maybe some plagiarism. Because one thing that's significant, that's really interesting, is that both of the mansions and Jane Eyre and Rebecca, both mansions burned down to the ground. So very similar stories. So there's some heat between these two novels that the novel Rebecca might have taken a lot of its content from Jane Eyre, but I think that there's still enough differences for them to be separate stories and for them to bring upon different messages. So that's my summary and analysis of Rebecca by Daphne Du Maurier. Please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video.